A quiet black boy stepped into Lone Star High, a school in Cedar Creek, Texas, where he'd come to finish his senior year and stay invisible. Khalil Turner didn't want attention, but before the first week ended, a guy in his class decided he was the perfect target. Laughter came first, then whispers, then public humiliation, and when the guy smirked, confident it was time for a final showdown, crowd gathered, waiting for the inevitable. But there was something they didn't know about Khalil. He wasn't just the new kid. He was a fighter, trained to battle, and he was about to make them all remember it. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the latest stories. The yellow school bus rolled to a stop at the curb in front of Lone Star High, brakes squealing as the door creaked open. Students poured out, laughing, shoving, moving in long-established packs. No one noticed the boy stepping off last, backpack slung over one shoulder, expression unreadable. Khalil Turner adjusted the strap and took a deep breath, scanning the red brick building ahead. It wasn't much different from his old school in Houston. Same crowded halls, same clamor of kids, same unwritten survival rules. Keep your head down, don't draw eyes, and stay out of trouble. That's how he'd always done it at every school before, and he planned to stick to that here. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to graduate and move on. As he passed through the main doors, Khalil felt eyes on him. Whispers traded softly. He knew the feeling. A new face always sparked curiosity. But at Lone Star High, a mostly white school, the attention on a black kid like him had a different edge. They didn't just look, they judged. What kind would he be? Loud, aggressive, or just another one of those kids? Khalil ignored it, eyes forward, searching for his locker in the packed hallway, and then he saw them. Bryce Wheeler, the name already buzzing on the bus, the way students glanced at the tall blonde jock with a mix of awe and wariness. Bryce wasn't just popular, he was in charge, the one who set the social order, deciding who mattered and who didn't. He never moved alone. Flanking him was Nate Wheeler, Bryce's older brother, a hulking guy with a smug grin that said he knew he was untouchable. Colton Hayes, a wiry kid with an easy smirk, the type who talked just to hear himself. And two girls, Leela Brooks and Sophie Reed, always hovering near Bryce like shadows. Khalil clocked their type instantly. He had no intention of getting involved. Khalil turned to his locker, twisting the combination, each click ringing cold, but he could still feel Bryce's stare slicing across him, sharp, probing, dangerous. The first period passed quietly, though the murmurs never stopped buzzing like flies. Someone shoulder-checked him in the hall, muttering, "He's from Houston, thinks he's tough, or something." Khalil kept his face blank, letting them think whatever. At the cafeteria, he picked an empty table in the corner, eating alone amid the lively chatter. Head low, he didn't join in, until the noise shifted, louder, sharper, aimed at him like an arrow. "Look at that." Bryce's voice cut through, smooth and gleeful. Khalil didn't budge, calmly sipping his water. "Oh, the new kid's too scared to talk." Lila chimed in, her tone mocking. "I think he's just showing off," Sophie added, acting all high and mighty, too good to speak. The cafeteria perked up. The show had begun. Khalil kept eating, giving them nothing. Then Colton piped up. "Maybe he doesn't know English." He smirked, laughter rippling out like waves. Nate leaned against a nearby table, bending close to Khalil. "Or maybe," he drawled, "he's just slow." The room erupted again. Bryce grinned wickedly, eyes locked on Khalil, hunting for a crack. He craved a reaction. He needed it. Because if the new kid kept ignoring him, that was a problem. If Khalil wasn't scared of Bryce Wheeler, then what? He reached out, knocking Khalil's water cup onto his tray, liquid splashing everywhere, soaking his food. The cafeteria hushed for a beat. Khalil exhaled slowly, set his fork down, wiped his hands on a napkin, and stood. Without glancing at Bryce or his crew, he picked up the tray, walked to the trash, and dumped it. Silent, deliberate. Laughter exploded behind him, but this time it was weaker, hesitant, uneasy. Bryce noticed too, because when Khalil turned back, their eyes met before he walked off, and there was something in that look, Not anger, not fear, but a chilling patience, thick with menace. For the first time in years, Bryce Wheeler tasted unease. The air at Lone Star High stayed heavy after the cafeteria scene, like lingering smoke creeping through the halls, smoldering. Khalil Turner moved through the students, face calm but senses taut as a wire, trying to shake off the icy glare he'd thrown Bryce before leaving. He didn't want trouble, didn't want a fight, but he knew well enough. At Cedar Creek, guys like Bryce didn't stop after one jab. They'd come back, and this time, they'd hit harder. Bryce Wheeler wasn't small time. At Lone Star High, he was the center of every gaze, blonde hair gleaming, strutting, with the swagger of a football star, lips perpetually curled in smugness. It wasn't just his broad shoulders or towering frame. He had an invisible power, the kind that decided who rose and who fell. Students looked at him with half admiration, half dread. Teachers turned a blind eye, because the Wheeler family had pulled in Cedar Creek. For Bryce, it wasn't just reputation, it was control. He loved calling the shots, picking who got in and who got crushed. And when Khalil showed up, cool and unshaken, Bryce pegged him as prey. He didn't roll solo, his crew stuck close, each playing a part in his game. Nate Wheeler, Bryce's brother, was a brute with a sneer, and hands that had flattened plenty of guys on the field. Nate lived to flex, ready to jump if Bryce gave the nod. Colton Hayes, lean but sharp-eyed, ran his mouth non-stop, stirring the pot for laughs. He was the spark. Then there were Lila Brooks and Sophie Reed, the venomous duo. Lila, curly-haired and cunning, was the strategist, whispering plans to Bryce. Sophie, petite but vicious-tongued, loved fanning the flames. Together, they formed an unbreakable wall, or so they thought. The cafeteria stunt gnawed at Bryce like a splinter. In class afterward, he sat rigid, fingers tapping the desk, eyes narrowing, as he replayed Khalil calmly standing, clearing his tray, and walking off without a word. It grated on him. Newbies usually panicked, flushed, or at least growled back. Khalil didn't. He gave Bryce nothing to latch onto, and that made Bryce feel his grip slipping. "Who does he think he is?" he muttered to Nate beside him. "Chill," Nate shrugged, voice low. "He wants to play tough. We'll break him." He smirked, slamming a fist on the desk like he could already see it. Leela tilted her head, whispering, "Weird, huh?" He didn't even flinch. New kids usually freak out or shake. Her tone was light, but her eyes were ice, dissecting. Bryce smirked. "He's faking it," he said, forcing confidence. "Acting cool. I'll rip that mask off." Leela nodded slightly, though her gaze flickered with doubt. From the back, Colton leaned in, chuckling. "Let me take another swing. I bet he'll crack this time." Sophie giggled beside him. "Yeah, or cry." His face then would be gold. Bryce didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, Khalil's last look flashing back, cold, deep, unreadable. He didn't like it, told himself it was nothing. What could a kid from Houston do? Bryce had ruled this school for 3 years. No one dared challenge him, and walked away whole. Meanwhile, Khalil wove through the halls, blending into the crowd. The vibe had shifted. Curious stares now mixed with anticipation. Word of the cafeteria spread like wildfire, and though he hated it, he knew he'd become the focus. He despised that. In Houston, attention led to disaster. A bully pushed too far, and before he could think, Khalil had put him in the hospital. He didn't want a repeat. He just wanted peace. But at his locker, he heard slow footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn to know who. Colton's voice drawled, teasing. "Hey, new kid, where you rushing off to? Scared of us?" Sophie and Leela's laughter followed, sharp as blades. Khalil kept twisting the lock, but Bryce's stare weighed on him from a distance. Not close, but suffocating. "Watch yourself," Nate added, voice low and menacing. "You don't want us watching you." Khalil slammed the locker shut, walked off without a glance. Their laughter echoed, but he tuned it out. In the next class, he took a back corner seat, pulled out his notebook. Let Bryce and his crew think what they wanted. He wouldn't give them what they craved. Not yet. In math class, Bryce sat like a statue, eyes on the board, but seeing nothing. The teacher's voice faded to a distant hum. Every blink brought back Khalil's look, calm, frigid, fearless. Not loud defiance, but a quiet that drove him nuts. At Lone Star High, he was the law. Anyone stepping up uninvited got crushed. A newbie from Houston wouldn't upset that balance. "I'll make him talk," Bryce growled, tilting his head to Nate, eyes still on the board. Nate chuckled, smug. "One more warning, not light this time." He slammed a hand down, eyes glinting with thrill. Lila leaned in, voice soft as a breeze. "He's odd. Newbies usually panic or snap. He's solid as rock." Her eyes narrowed, probing something unclear. Bryce snorted, brushing it off. "It's an act, all for show. I'll humiliate him in front of everyone." Lila nodded faintly, but her gaze held a trace of thought. Khalil had something she couldn't shake. That night, in a small kitchen under yellow light, Khalil sat at the table. A plate of cold rice and fried chicken sat untouched before him. But he didn't lift his fork. His eyes bored into it, searching for answers that weren't there. His dad, Reginald Turner, stood at the counter, salt and pepper hair, muscles softer than his boxing days, but still carrying the weight of a man who'd faced hell and survived. He watched his son, silent, patient. He knew this quiet. He'd lived it before every fight, bottling emotions to stay sharp. Reginald set his coffee down, crossed his arms, and spoke, voice deep, firm, commanding attention without volume. "All right, out with it. What's up?" Khalil inhaled deep, exhaled slow through his nose, eyes still on the plate. He didn't want to spill, not from fear, but from worry he'd lose control. "I don't want to fight," he said, voice tight, not at his dad, but at himself, clinging to his last thread. Reginald studied him a long moment before replying. "But you're thinking about it." Not a question, a fact. He knew his kid too well. Khalil gripped the table, nails digging into skin. "I don't want to fight," he repeated, voice tighter. "But I don't want to be the guy they walk over either. I walked away today, and I swear it's worse now." He looked up, his sharp, cold eyes meeting his dad's. "They won't stop." Reginald sipped his coffee, weighing it. "You walked away 'cause you didn't want to hurt him," he said, voice even but solid. Khalil blinked, caught off guard. Reginald set the mug down, crossed his arms. "I taught you to defend yourself, not to turn you into a weapon. But I also taught you to know when they won't let go, until you make 'em stop." Khalil swallowed hard, the words sinking heavy. He knew the truth in them. He'd grown up in his dad's gym, among men who lived by discipline and strength. Since 8, he'd sparred with bigger opponents, learning to dodge, strike, read moves, feet fast, reflexes like lightning, forged through hours of sweat. But that power came with a cost. The last time he let it loose, in Houston, a bully went down, arm broken, face bloodied. The family had to move, and Khalil swore he'd never unleash that beast again. "If I swing, it won't stop," he whispered, voice dropping. "It never does." Reginald nodded. "True, but dodging doesn't always end it either. If they think you're weak, they'll keep stomping till you fall." He pulled a chair, sat across, eyes locked on him. "So what's your move?" Khalil's voice shrank. "What do I do?" The question hung heavy, like facing a fork he didn't want. Reginald leaned in, hands on the table, voice calm but steel. "You don't start fights, Khalil, you finish 'em." His eyes wavered. "You don't need to prove anything to them. But if they won't quit, you've gotta make it so they don't dare try again." Khalil breathed slow, the weight in his chest easing. His dad went on. I know you can control it. You're not some kid swinging blind, 'cause he's mad. You think, you plan." He paused, then added, eyes steady. "So if you have to fight, don't do it to teach him. Do it to shut it down before it blows up." Khalil sat there, letting his dad's words carve into every corner of his mind. He didn't want to fight, honestly didn't, but deep down, he knew the battle had found him. In Houston, he'd lost control, and the price was steep. Now in Cedar Creek, he vowed not to let it happen again. But if Bryce and his crew wouldn't quit, he'd have to do something, not to show off, but to protect himself. He looked at the cold rice, then up into his dad's eyes. "I'll try," he said, voice low but firm. "But if they won't leave me alone." He didn't finish, but Reginald got it. He nodded, stood, and patted Khalil's shoulder before leaving the kitchen. The days after that talk with his dad, Khalil Turner walked into Lone Star High like crossing a battle line. Each step was cautious, ears primed for any sound. Reginald's words echoed, "You don't start it, but you'll end it." Khalil got what he meant, but he still tried to steer clear of trouble. He hadn't come here to repeat the past he'd dragged from Houston, the past he was trying to bury. He didn't want the power sleeping inside him to wake up, but the probing stares, the hallway whispers, the snickers behind his back, they were like tiny scratches, pushing him to the edge. He knew it, the showdown was closing in. On the flip side, Bryce Wheeler was like a man on hot coals. The more Khalil stayed silent, the more it ate at him. The way he brushed off jabs, dodged taunts, even didn't flinch when shoved down in front of the class. It all made Bryce feel his hold slipping. 3 years as king of Lone Star High, and no one had ever ignored him like this. It made him feel weak. He needed Khalil to break, needed a reaction, anything to prove his spot couldn't be touched. "Let's end this cat and mouse game," he snarled to Nate at break. "This time I want him on his knees." Nate smirked, eyes cold. "I'll pin him down for you." Colton, nearby, raised a brow, jumping in with glee. "Let me rile him up first. I want to hear him yell." Lila and Sophie exchanged glances, smirking. No words needed. The plan was set. And that afternoon's gym class was the perfect shot. In the gym, the class split into teams for basketball. Khalil didn't like school sports. Too loud, too many eyes. He took a spot at the far end of the court, keeping distance, doing everything to fade out. But he couldn't dodge forever. The second he touched the ball, Nate charged, slamming a shoulder into his chest. Khalil stumbled, nearly fell. Colton's laugh rang out from across. "What's up, new kid? Can't play?" He didn't answer. He stood, brushed his hands, eyes quiet like a lake before a storm. Next time Colton closed in, yanking Khalil's wrist hard, sending the ball bouncing off court. "Clumsy much?" he jeered. Nate didn't miss a beat, barreling into Khalil with his full weight, knocking him flat on the wood floor. A whistle blew, the coach signaled, but just shook his head, and turned away, pretending not to see. Bryce stood at the court's end, arms crossed, eyes smug. He was waiting for Khalil to snap, lash out, fight back, and lose everything. But Khalil just got up, fixed his shirt, and walked back to his spot. Not a word, not a glare. His eyes stayed eerily calm, and that pissed Bryce off more than any punch could. On the bleachers, students started buzzing. "Is he frozen, or what?" one whispered. But the tone held doubt. Everyone could tell this wasn't fear, it was control, chillingly tight. Bryce clenched his fists. He needed an end, a knockout blow to erase the growing unease inside him. When the final bell rang through Lone Star High, Khalil Turner didn't hesitate. He knew what was waiting. Bryce Wheeler's challenge had spread like wildfire through the halls, reaching every kid in Cedar Creek. After gym, no teachers, no cameras, just a lesson Bryce was sure would put Khalil in his place. But Khalil wasn't dumb. He'd been through this before. Different faces, different schools, same tired script. He didn't want to fight, but if Bryce and his crew wouldn't let up, he'd do what his dad taught him, end it before it truly began. He stepped out of the main building, late afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the grounds. He headed straight for the empty lot behind the gym, where cracked concrete stretched under a darkening sky. They were already there, waiting. Bryce stood center, arms crossed, smug grin blooming. Beside him was Nate, huge and menacing. Colton, smirking with sharp eyes. Lila and Sophie, hanging back with eager looks. Around them, at least 20 other students formed a loose circle, whispering, phones up, ready for the show. Khalil approached, slow, controlled, stopping a few yards from Bryce. He said nothing, just stood, hands loose at his sides, eyes calm but piercing. Bryce tilted his head, laughing loud. "Oh, you actually showed. I thought you'd keep running like yesterday." His voice dripped mockery, echoing through the crowd. Khalil exhaled soft replying, voice even, "I don't run." Short, flat words, but enough to make Bryce's grin falter for a second. He scoffed, regaining his strut. "That's so, you don't even stand up for yourself." He stepped closer, eyes flashing arrogance. "I'll make you see who you are here." Khalil finally spoke, voice low but clear, stilling the air. "I'm here to warn you." The words landed like a rock in the crowd, silencing them. Bryce blinked, caught off guard. "Warn me?" He laughed big, but it carried a strained edge. Nate and Colton traded looks. Lila and Sophie frowned, puzzled. Khalil went on, tone unchanged. "You don't want to do this." Bryce laughed harder, but this time his eyes flickered, a spark of unease flashing. "Listen to him, so cute," he taunted. "The new kid's threatening me." He turned to the crowd, arms wide like a showman. "You hear that? He says I don't want to do this." Laughter rose from the circle, but not as strong as Bryce wanted. Khalil stood still, unmoving. "Not a threat," he said, "a warning." Those words made Bryce's pulse quicken, though he wouldn't admit it. He hated this, hated how Khalil wasn't scared, hated how he made him feel like he was screwing up, but he couldn't back down in front of everyone. He had to win. Nate, sensing his brother's tension, stepped up, cracking his knuckles. "You done talking, or we starting now?" He smirked, advancing on Khalil, towering over him, by at least a head. Bryce grinned, clawing back confidence. "Hear that, Nate? He says we don't want to do this. Why don't you show him how wrong he is?" Nate growled, lunging with a lightning-fast punch. But as his fist swung, Khalil wasn't there. He slid aside, swift as a ghost, grabbed Nate's wrist with one hand, and twisted hard, using the guy's own momentum against him. In a flash, Nate crashed onto the concrete, back slamming down, air whooshing out of his lungs. The crowd gasped, and ooh rippling out. Bryce felt his stomach knot. Nate lay there, coughing, eyes wide with panic. This couldn't be happening. Colton hesitated a beat, but couldn't back off with everyone watching. Roaring, "You got lucky." He charged, swinging, but Khalil dodged again, stepping aside, catching Colton's wrist mid-strike, spinning behind, and locking his arm so fast, Colton only managed a choked yelp. Khalil let go. Colton stumbled forward, clutching his arm, staring at Khalil like he wasn't human. The crowd went dead silent. Just Nate and Colton's ragged breathing left. Bryce felt his pulse hammering. He'd lost control. Khalil stood there, hands loose at his sides, perfectly calm, staring straight at him. "Still think I'm running?" he asked, voice low but sharp as a blade. Bryce didn't answer. He couldn't. For the first time ever, he felt like prey. The crowd that had gathered to watch Khalil get crushed now stood stunned, their shocked eyes reflecting back at Bryce like a warped mirror. Nate stayed down, struggling to breathe, pride shattered in front of everyone. Colton gripped his arm, gritting his teeth, clinging to scraps of bravado. Lila and Sophie stood frozen, smirks wiped from their faces. Bryce felt blood rush to his head. He didn't think, didn't plan, he just moved. He lunged, hands up to grab Khalil in a desperate bid to reclaim control, but before he could touch him, Khalil caught his wrist mid-air, holding it like a vice. He didn't turn, just stood still, body locked. Bryce froze, breath catching in his throat. Then Khalil turned, eyes locking onto Bryce. He leaned in, close enough for only Bryce to hear, "You've got no power over me, and you never will." He tightened his grip just a bit, not enough to hurt, but enough for Bryce to feel his own weakness, then let go. Bryce staggered back, heart pounding, body betraying him in front of everyone. Khalil didn't wait for a reply. He turned, walked through the hushed crowd, leaving Bryce standing there, humiliated and powerless. The next morning, news of Khalil Turner taking down Nate Wheeler and Colton Hayes, then leaving Bryce Wheeler frozen helpless before the crowd, swept through Cedar Creek school halls like a storm. Whispers weren't mocking or curious anymore. They carried awe, respect, even a touch of fear. Bryce, who'd once ruled the school like a king, now faced doubt and chatter. Khalil still walked in with his usual calm, but this time, the eyes on him were different. Bryce Wheeler strode through the halls, shoulders back, chin high, designer backpack slung over one side, acting like nothing happened. But he couldn't hide it. Everything had shifted. Whispers trailed him like shadows. Did you see him just stand there? Nate hit the ground hard, and students' looks weren't admiration or fear anymore, but doubt, even pity. He clenched his jaw, faking confidence. But inside, he knew the power he'd held was gone. In one afternoon, at the cafeteria, Bryce sat at his usual table, but the vibe around him was colder than ever. Nate and Colton were nearby, but both were oddly quiet. Nate, pride trampled, kept his head down, avoiding eyes, shoulders still sore from the fall. Colton nursed his arm, tossing out a few jokes, but no one bit. Lila and Sophie, usually the instigators, sat still, gazes dodging Bryce, like they wanted no part of it. The crowd that once swarmed this table had thinned. Some even stood back, whispering about what the new kid did. Bryce gripped his water bottle, helplessness surging like a wave. Khalil, meanwhile, sat alone in the cafeteria corner like always, eating the lunch his mom packed, sandwich and chips, with unchanged calm. He didn't care about the sneaky glances his way, didn't care about the growing buzz. He took Nate out in a second. Bryce didn't even swing back. A few basketball team guys passed by, nodding at him with quiet respect. A girl who'd never glanced at him before peeked over, curious. But Khalil didn't respond. He wasn't here to be a hero or take Bryce's throne. He just wanted the trouble gone, and now it was. A figure loomed by his table. Khalil looked up, seeing Miles Dawson, a scrawny, bespectacled kid Bryce had picked on since last year. Miles hesitated, then said softly, "Thanks for standing up to them." His voice shook, but his eyes shone with gratitude. Khalil eyed him a second, nodded lightly, said nothing. Miles gave a faint smile, then walked off, leaving Khalil to his silence. Across the room, Bryce saw it, and his grip tightened on the bottle. He couldn't stand it, not just losing power, but now the kids he'd bullied were thanking Khalil. He turned to Nate, growling, "We've gotta do something. I'm not letting that guy take everything." Nate shrugged, voice low, "What you want? He's fast. I couldn't do shit." Colton cut in, "I'll spread some dirt on him. Say he's a psycho from Houston or something." But Lila shook her head. "No one'll buy it." They all saw. Bryce gritted his teeth. He knew Lila was right. He had no way to claw back cred with the crowd that once worshipped him. The basketball coach had even pulled him into the office that morning, warning him about disruptive behavior after rumors of the fight reached the staff. He'd lost it all, not just reputation, but his crew's loyalty. When school ended, Khalil headed home, stepping into the kitchen with shoes still dusty from the lot behind the gym. Reginald Turner stood at the counter, pouring coffee as usual. He glanced at him. No questions needed. Khalil's calm said it all. "Done?" he asked, voice deep. Khalil nodded, sitting at the table. "I didn't start it," he said, eyes meeting his dad's. "But I ended it." Reginald cracked a rare small smile. "Good. You did right. Ended it without letting it drag." He patted Khalil's shoulder, then turned back to his coffee, leaving Khalil there, relief spreading through his chest. He wasn't proud of fighting, but he was satisfied he'd guarded his peace. The next day, the school still buzzed, but Khalil didn't care. He walked the halls, eyes steady, tuning out whispers that had flipped from mockery to admiration. Bryce, sitting alone in the cafeteria, watched him from afar, eyes burning with resentment, but powerless. He knew he'd lost, not just a fight, but his place at Lone Star High. Lone Star High wasn't Bryce Wheeler's stage anymore. Just days after the gym lot showdown, Bryce sat solo in the cafeteria, his once packed table, now just him. Nate, Colton, Lila, and Sophie had drifted off, eyes dodging him like they didn't want the fallout. Kids who used to orbit him now whispered about his defeat, their looks full of pity. Bryce gripped his water bottle, clinging to arrogance, but he knew everything he'd built in Cedar Creek had crumbled. He wasn't in control. He had nothing left. Khalil Turner, on the other hand, moved through the halls with the same steady gaze as day one. He didn't heed the whispers or the respectful stares now aimed his way. A few basketball team guys asked him to join, but Khalil shook his head, declining softly. He wasn't here to take Bryce's crown or claim his spot. He just wanted to finish the year, grab his diploma, and move forward. Miles Dawson, the kid who'd thanked him, sometimes passed by with a shy smile, but Khalil just nodded, keeping distance. At home, he sat with his dad, Reginald, recounting it all. Reginald nodded, eyes proud, but sparing words. Khalil knew he'd done right, not to prove anything, but to shield his peace. Stepping outside, Cedar Creek's sunlight hit his face, and he felt a freedom he'd lost in Houston. Bryce and his crew weren't a threat anymore. Khalil had risen above, not by becoming a bully, but by being himself, strong, controlled, unbound by the past. He looked ahead, ready for what's next, certain he'd never let anyone rule him again. The story, Bullies pick on the wrong new black boy, not knowing he's a brutal fighter, mirrors real social issues in the U.S. today, especially in schools, where peer pressure, racial bias, and violence persist. The setting of Lone Star High in Cedar Creek, Texas, a small town with mostly white students, evokes communities where racial differences, like Khalil Turner, a black kid from Houston, often draw scrutiny and unfair treatment. Bryce Wheeler, with power rooted in football fame and family clout, stands for bullies who use status to dominate, a common sight in American schools, where sports and social rank can shape worth. The gym lot clash, where Khalil took down Nate and Colton without flaunting it, shows true strength isn't in showboating, but in confidence and self-control, something modern America, with its racial tensions and violence, sorely needs. The takeaway isn't just don't bully, it's how to face social pressure smartly and firmly. Khalil didn't crush Bryce to prove he's better. He acted only when cornered, like when Bryce tipped his tray, or challenged him after school, then walked away, uncaring of fame. It's a reminder that in today's U.S., where social media amps up conflicts, and the urge to win, sometimes silence and timely self-defense speak louder than any brag. The advice, build patience like Khalil, learn from his dad, Reginald, that you don't start fights, but you finish them. In a diverse, cutthroat society, guard your worth without letting others define you, like Khalil did, rejecting Bryce's throne and moving forward with his own freedom. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to join us in exploring stories of inner strength and triumph over adversity like Khalil's. Thanks for sticking with us.